Masechet Nazir Daf Nun Dalid. We're in the middle of discussing the Mishnah that gives a list of all types of tumat met that not only cause tumat met, but also are severe enough that they cause a Nazir to have to shave. In the next Mishnah that we'll see today, also, we have a list of other items that are also cause tumat met, but a Nazir does not have to shave for those types of tumat met. Okay, among the list that in our Mishnah is a limb from either a live or a dead body that has enough flesh on it that it could regenerate. So that would cause tumat ohel, and also would make a Nazir have to shave. Now our question is, well, what if it does not have enough flesh? So this is not mentioned in the next Mishnah, and so we're not sure what the status is. Now it would certainly not cause tent impurity, because only if it's a whole limb, it has this much flesh on it, it would cause tent impurity. So it will not cause tent impurity at all, and certainly not make a Nazir shave. But what about through touching or carrying this limb that has insufficient flesh? What would be the status of it? Would it make a Nazir have to shave if he only touched it? So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, en Nazir megalech alehen, since this only says if there is enough flesh, then it causes all types of impurity. If there's not enough flesh, it will cause zero impurity. It does not cause any tumat met at all, and certainly a Nazir would not have to shave for it. That ends up being the halacha according to Rambam. Resh Lakish, however, says a Nazir, if he touches it or carries it, it does become tameh met and has to shave, because this is only talking about tent impurity if it has a lot of flesh, but if it has insufficient flesh, not tent impurity, but yes, the other types. Okay, that was the machloket that we discussed yesterday, and then we wondered, what kind of case are we talking about right here? Is there a bone on it? If there is a bone, well, then the bone by itself would cause would cause the Nazir to have to shave, because if it's impure, it's tumat met. So in that case, why would Yochanan say he's off the hook if he touches it? If you touch a bone, if it's the size of even bigger than a barley grain, then that would cause tumat met. And so can't be that. Rather must be that there's not even a bone that's the size of a barley grain. Well, then why would Resh Lakish say that this causes tumah if there's no bone there? And our answer is, Amar lech Resh Lakish, Lo'olam delet be'esim kaseora, v'afilu hachi rachamana rabies. It says, even though there's no bone there, it's just flesh, but it was a limb that came from a body, a live body or a dead body. Even so, the pasuk that we're about to see comes to include even that as a source of impurity for touching or carrying, and would make a Nazir have to shave. And so here we're going to derive it. We're going to bring the full pasuk with the full derasha, even though we only need one piece of it. Detanya. We can look at the pasuk inside for the context. It says anything that anyone who touches a person who was killed or who died naturally, so that's b'chal al cherev o bemet, and so that would be a whole body. But then it goes on and says, "O be'asim odam o bekaber yitma shivat yamim," or also a bone or a grave will be impure for 7 days. So each of these phrases comes to include other cases. So here we go. Al peneh hasadeh ze mahil al peneh hamet. Since it says al peneh, on top of the field, and could have just said in the field, so that refers to a tent impurity. So this is a source that body does cause tent impurity. Bachalal ze eve min achai v'yesh lo lahalot arucha. So the halal, that someone who was killed, that refers to a limb that was severed from a living person that does contain enough flesh to heal. That will also cause tent impurity. Cherev hare ze kehalal. It is interesting. The cherev now literally means someone who was killed by a sword, but you just said a dead body was a matter how he died. So this word sword comes to include the sword itself, a sword that became tameh lamet by touching a dead body. The sword itself becomes a source of tumat met as severe as the body itself. So this applies to metal implements like a sword, have this special law that they become like a source of tumat met. A very interesting law. Okay. O bemet ze ever nechelal min hamet. So met comes to include a limb that comes from a dead body. We saw the one above was from a live body. If it was severed, this is from a dead body that was severed. Or be'asem adam ze roba asamot, or bekaber ze keber satum. So asem adam, a bone, that is referring to a quarter kav of bones that will cause tent impurity, and kabed refers to a sealed grave. So the law here is that if you have a body that's, let's say, buried underground, and let's say there's no space above it in the ground, it's buried, let's say, without a coffin, just right in the ground, and so in that case, the tum'ah goes all the way up and straight down, right, all the way up to the sky. On the other hand, that's the kever satum. That's what it means. On the other hand, if there is space between the body and let's say it's in a box or something, or in a cave, and there is a tefach of space, empty space above the body, in that case, the impurity will not go up. It will remain within that area. That's why nowadays, let's say, can a Kohen go on a plane? The answer is yes, as long as, and the Chevra Kadisha knows, if they are preparing a body to be on a plane, they will put it in some kind of box and leave a tefach of space above it, so that will contain the tum'ah and will not go past it. It only goes up if there is no tefach. Okay. Damar mor tum'ah bokat ve'ola bokat ve'yoredet. And now we interrupt to explain this law of kever satum, that the tum'ah will go all the way up and go all the way down if there's no tefach of space. Okay. Ve'ilu gabe negi'ah amar Rav Yehuda tanya. Okay. All that was for tent impurity. But now we're going to talk about touching impurity. And here we have another braita that says, Kol hanogeh ba'ayasem o behalal ba'ayasem ze ayasem kis'ora. Even though before we learned esem as a rova hakav, that was for tent impurity. You need more to make tent impurity. But for esem here, if you have just a bone that is even the size of a barley grain or more, that causes touching impurity. O behalal ze ebra nechelal min hachai ve'en bo lahalot arucha. And the halal is a limb that was severed from a living person, but there's not enough flesh to heal. And o bemet ze ebra nechelal min hamet. And the word met comes to refer to a limb that was taken from a dead body, that was severed from a dead body and does not have enough flesh. So these are the two key things that Resh Lakish is going to point to, as we're going to explain. O bekaber amer Resh Lakish ze keber shedifne hadibur. The word keber comes to include a grave before halacha was given to Bnei Israel. So this would apply to non-Jews, still have a law of tum'ah, of touching, but they do not, non-Jewish bodies do not have a law do not cause tum'ah by tent impurity. Now let's analyze that section of the Braita regarding touching impurity. When you talk about a limb from a body, what kind of case is that? If this limb has a bone in it, well then the person would be tameh lamet from touching a bone that is the size of a barley. Rather, it has to be talking about a case of a limb that has no bone, or a bone less than the size of a barley grain, and it's just flesh, and the flesh is not enough that it would heal if it were attached, and nevertheless it's included within this derasha of items that cause touching impurity. So this is the Resh Lakish's source for the fact that in this case of a limb severed from a live body or dead body that has no bone and that has less flesh than could regenerate and heal, that still causes touching impurity. All right, so that's Reish Lakish's source. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, what are you going to do with that source? Amalach Rabbi Yochanan, Lo'olam de'it be, v'meno inyan l'magaot, and no inyan l'masa'o. Rabbi Yochanan could say that this baraita is talking about a case where the limb does have a bone. And then you'll ask, well, why do I need to know that? Touching a bone by itself, even without any flesh. I already know from the word ayasem that would cause touching impurity. So Rabbi Yochanan says, well, if it's not needed for this case, for the bone, then you can apply it to a different prohibition, and that we will learn from here that's prohibited even when you carry it. Right, from this source over here, I might only know when you touch it, it would cause impurity. But what about carrying it? Like if you're carrying it, in a box or on top of a pillow, and you're not actually touching it. And so this comes to include that one becomes tameh lamet, not only from touching it, but also from carrying it. And so there you go. Rabbi Yochanan also can explain those pisukim in a different way. But if it's it's talking about a case where it does have a bone, but not enough flesh. Only then it causes impurity. But if it has no bone, insufficient flesh, then according to Rabbi Yochanan, it does not cause impurity at all. No kind, not tent, and not even touching or carrying. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan says, well, the Mishnah only says if it has flesh, then it causes all kinds of impurity, but no flesh, then it would not cause any type of impurity. Okay, now that we finished that, we go to the next section. Umazeh bashilishi ubashibi'i vesoter. Now, in all these cases that a Nazir becomes tameh lamet, these are severe types of tumah lamet, and they make the Nazir negate all the days that he counted previously, and then he's going to have to do the purification from tumat met and get sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day with para aduma waters, and then he can start counting after that. So ibayalahu haide tekatani ad sheyitar. Mishnah says he can start counting again from the beginning, only when he becomes purified. So when exactly is that? Bashivi'i ka'eh ad avid ha'erev shemesh umaneh Rabbi Eliezer hi. O dilma bashimini ka'eh umay ad shehitad ad sheyavi korbenotav umaneh Rabbanan hi. So this ad shehitad, is that talking about the 7th day? Meaning he got sprinkled on the 3rd and 7th day. On that very 7th day, he can count that as one. And so as long as he already got sprinkled and he's waiting till sunset, that is considered the first day. And that would be the follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. We saw this machloket back on Daf Yud Chet. Or maybe it means that it's talking about the 8th day, and ad sheyitar, until he purifies, means until he completely finishes and brings his korbanot on the day after, right, the 8th day of his purification, he brings his korbanot, and so this would follow Rabbanan, who say he can only start counting on the 8th day. What is the Mishnah saying? It's not clear what ad sheyitar means, and we have an answer. Tashema b'dekatani sefa מתחיל מונה מיד, הירשה מאי עד שיתהר, עד שיביא קורבנותיו, ומנה רבנן היא דמרה, נזירות טהרה, עד שמיני לחילה. So we can figure it out from the Sefa. That's the next Mishnah right here. The next Mishnah is going to talk about cases where a Nazir does become tameh lamet, but it doesn't negate his counting. And that person says he's going to have to become purified, and moneh miyad, he can start recounting, in other words, continue counting immediately. And so, since it says over there immediately, that's in contrast to this previous Mishnah that says ad sheyitar. So, since the Sefer says matchil umoneh miyad, ha-resha, so in this, the next Mishnah says miyad, so this Mishnah previously that says until he becomes pure, that must mean until he brings his korbanot. And that would follow the opinion of Rabbanan that says that nizirut of tahara, the period of Nizirut that restarts after becoming pure, after he was Tameh Lamet, only restarts at the 8th day and on. So until the 8th day, sorry, you can't. All that is negated. So we see that from the fact that this Mishnah says Ad Sheyitad, and the next Mishnah says Miyad, you can tell that Ad Sheyitad means that it's longer than Miyad. Miyad would mean the 7th day immediately. Ad Sheyitad means, no, you got to wait one more day, and only on the 8th day you can start counting. All right, good. So that completes the first Mishnah of all the items of Tumat Met, for which a Nazir would have to negate his previous days. But now the following are less severe, and a Nazir does not have to negate his days. Aval hasichachot ve'aperaot ube'et haperas. If you have hanging branches or a stone projectile that is going over a grave, and the Nazir walks under it, that normally would be a tumat ohel. However, in these cases, because it's in public and we're not sure which of these branches is over the grave and which is not. So therefore, these are less severe. Similarly, bet haperas, that's a field that we know had a grave, but it was plowed, and so we don't know where the grave is. We don't know if it was smashed up, if it's mixed up. And so all these, we're not sure exactly where the grave is, if there's impurity. So normally a person who walks under there, we're going to have to say, listen, a Kohen should not walk there, and it will cause tumat met, but this is only midrabanan, out of safek. So because it's only drabanan or safek, we're not going to cause a Nazir to have to negate his days and shave and bring korbanot. We only do that if it's 100% for sure, deoraita tumat met. Okay. Also, Eretz Ha'amim, the land, all lands outside of Eretz Yisrael are considered impure. The Gemara will talk about exactly what type of impurity. Is it actual tumat met, or just a low status because of spiritual impurity? Also, hagolel v'hadofek. A golel is a large stone that's rolled to cover a grave, and the dofek are the walls of the grave. If someone touches them, they become tameh lamet, but that will not cause a Nazir to have to shave. Also, revi'it dam ve'ohel. Revi'it dam does cause tent impurity generally, but not sufficient that would make a Nazir tameh. That it would make a Nazir tameh, but not sufficient that it would make him have to shave. Also, ohel, if there is a tent over with a dead body inside, and someone touches the tent from the outside, the tent itself does become tameh lamet. Nazir does not have to shave for that. Also, roba atzamot, only a quarter of a kav of atzamot will cause tent impurity, but is not sufficient to make a Nazir shave. Vekelim hanogeim bamet, other vessels, meaning not a sword, not metal vessels, other types of vessels that touch a dead body, only a sword and things that are like that, have the same level as the corpse itself, but other vessels do not have that same level, and therefore a Nazir will not have to shave for touching these other vessels. Ubime sofro ubime gemaro al elu en Nazir megaleach. Also a mesorah, while he's counting his days of purification, and also, before that, the days that he is a full-fledged mesorah. See, a mesorah, when he sees something, first he goes and shows the Kohen, this is the sarat. Kohen, sometimes he says, listen, you have to be contained and put in quarantine to see whether or not you are or not. We're not sure. And then you come back later, and if he says, oh yes, now for sure you are, so that those days of his definite impurity, and then the days that he has during his purification process, all those days he is tameh. Now he's not tameh lamet, so it's not going to stop and negate the days that he had before, but they don't count towards the Nazirut. So that if he was a Nazir and he counted 10 days, and then he becomes a Mesorah, and then he's dealing with Sarat, and he's for sure Mesorah, and then he becomes purified, and he's dealing with that for a couple of weeks. Those couple of weeks don't count towards the Nazirut, but they don't negate the days before either. Instead, he starts counting. He continues counting after he's done. So on all these cases in this Mishnah, the Nazir does not have to shave. He does not bring any korbanot. He will have to sprinkle himself on the 3rd and 7th day if he's tameh lamet. then he does get sprinkled with paraduma water. It does not negate the days that he had already counted as a pure Nazir. He begins counting immediately. We know immediately means on the seventh day, when after he sprinkles before sunset. That counts as day one. That or count as in my case day 11 if he already counted 10 days before that, and he does not have to bring any korbanot. Be'emet amru yemei hazav v'hazava v'yemei hezkero shel mesorah hare elu olin lo. In truth, they said. This phrase be'emet amru, according to Rishonim, means that this is a special halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So this is saying it's ancient tradition and clarifying what we said before, that if a Nazir rather becomes a Zav or Zavah, that's another kind of a serious impurity, but it's not Tumat Met. So during there, if there is Zav and Zavah, while this Nazir is impure as a Zav, but it does not impede at all. And those days, even though he's tameh as a zav, that counts for him. He continues counting. And even a mesorah who's confined, when we're not sure if he's a mesorah or not, and he has to be in quarantine to check how it's going to develop, those days also count towards the Nazirut. So he could continue counting right on 10, 11, 12, and he keeps going. So if he's a Zav, he's impure as a Zav, he becomes pure, he waits seven clean days, whatever he needs to do, and then he continues counting without any break. All right, that is the Mishnah. Now, Ve'eluhen hasechachot ilane mesecha la'aretz ufraot hayosaot min hagader. What does it mean? Like sechachot, like schach, like we have on Sukkah, on Sukkot. So these are overhangs. It could be a tree that overhangs on the earth, or a stone projectile, like an awning or something that comes from out of a fence. All these would cause a tent impurity, but they're not so serious especially when they're in a public domain. We don't assume that we know for sure that there was a grave right underneath this particular branch, and so we are machmir, and for a kohen or other people, but for a nazir, we're going to assume that he does not have to shave for that. Okay, ve'eres ha'amim ibailehu eres ha'amim mishum avira gazru aleha o dilma mishum gusha gazru aleha. This impurity of foreign countries, or any country besides Israel, what kind of impurity is this? Is this because of the airspace? Is it just the general airspace? So the rabbis make a gezerah. Now, if it's airspace, then it's not actual tumat met. It's just that, this is spiritual type of impurity. Or do we say the earth itself? Maybe there's graves all around and they're not marked. Sometimes there are cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries, that then are overrun and built upon and made out of, make a parking lot out of it in these foreign countries, and they don't care. And you never know where it's going to be. So we have to assume that this is actual, possible tumat met. Okay, so that's our question. Is this a spiritual, airborne impurity, or is it the actual ground? Okay, either way, Nazir will not have to shave because of that. But we did see, if you remember, that story of Queen Helena, who was a Nazir outside of Israel, and then Hillel said, sorry, it doesn't work outside of Israel, so this would be the reason. Now, Tashema umazeh b'shelishi ub'shevi'i v'yamat mishum avira haza'ala mali. Well, we can figure out an answer. Since this very Mishnah says he has to get sprinkled on the third and seventh day from paraduma waters, well, that means it's actual tumat met. And if you say it's just from the air, spiritual impurity, why would he need to get sprinkled? This is not technical, legal impurity. It's just encouraging people to live in Israel. So elalab mishum gusha. Rather, it must be the earth itself was decreed midrabanan, that we're going to consider it all as like a one big cemetery. The whole entire earth, except for Eretz Yisrael, is like one big cemetery. So it must be that, because that's why, yes, he would have to consider himself to tameh lamet, and sprinkle on the third and seventh, although it doesn't rise to the level of, for sure, deoraita, that he would have to shave and bring korbanot. So that seems to be a good conclusion. But then we say maybe not. Lo leolam emalach mishum avira v'rikatane ashe'ara. No, in fact, maybe it's only airborne impurity. It's not legal technical impurity. And when it says he has to shave, he has to sprinkle on the third and seventh, that's talking about the other items on the list. Not everything on the list is tumat met. Like mesorah is on the list. That's not tumat met. And so for most of the things on the list, he's going to have to get sprinkled on the third and seventh day, but not for all of them. So, and this one was talking about airborne impurity that is more of a spiritual impurity that applies outside the land of Israel. And in fact, we're not just forcing this reading into the Mishnah. It actually makes sense to say this. Since this very Mishnah talks about other vessels, like not a sword, and that touched a dead body, and so those also, wait a second, if someone touched some item that touched a dead body that's not metal, and not like a sword, would they require sprinkling on the third and seventh day? Do they become tameh met? No, they don't. And so we see that it's actually talking about the other items on the list. And so it's not the only one. There are other items on the list that also do not become tameh lamet, that would require a sprinkling on the third and seventh day. And so this one also, if a Nazir goes outside the land of Israel, he would receive the spiritual type of tum'ah from the airspace, but is not legal tumat met, and would not require him to get sprinkled on the third and seventh day. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.